Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I'm Bob Allison, the chair of Rev 250's advisory committee. Revolution 250 is a consortium of 70 or so organizations looking for ways to commemorate the 250th anniversaries of the American Revolution. And I am delighted today to have with us two guests, actually from one of our premier partner organizations, Boston National Historical Park and the National Park Service. Julia Mize, who is the lead ranger for the Dorchester Heights National Historical Site, and Ruth Raphael, who is the program director of for landscape architecture and design at the Boston National Historical Park. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Great to have you both. So Julia, could you tell us a little bit about Dorchester Heights?
Well, before I get started, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement for the people who came before. Dorchester Heights and many of the sites in historical Boston are on Massachusetts land, and the Massachusetts tribe members are still here today, and they still live on their traditional land. So I just want to acknowledge that. Dorchester Heights is one of the sites in Boston National Historical Park. It is, shall we say, a little off the beaten path. It is not part of the Freedom Trail, which is further north and ends at the Bunker Hill Monument. But Dorchester Heights, in my humble opinion, has a little more significance, I think, than even Bunker Hill. And again, we might argue that, but for now,
I won't argue that.
Dorchester Heights is the site of the fortification which led to the evacuation of Boston by the British troops on March 17, 1776. It is located in South Boston. It's also known as Thomas Park, which encompasses about 5 acres, including the monument that was placed there, right, 1901, 1902. And it is a place where you can go and look for miles. You can see the Blue Hills. You can see Spectacle Island. You can see Roxbury. It is the high ground, and that is the reason it was so important that the provincials, as the colonist militia were called, to take it, and it became the anchor of the siege line. And it's every year we have a celebration on March 17th combined with St. Patrick's Day as an evacuation day, parade and ceremony.
Great, thank you. Now, Ruth, I understand that the Park Service has plans to do a lot of much needed restoration of the site.
Yes, we have completed design for what we're calling the hardscapes, which is all the concrete walkways and walls on the site, as well as restoration of the monument. So we will be doing, and that project is currently in design. We have schematic design, and we're going into design development on the monument portion of the project.
And one piece of that is going to be to have part of the outline of the Star Fort that was there at one time. Yes,
and it will have sort of granite markers that will mark the corners of the Star Fortification. And when we were doing some excavation for work that was done back in the mid-90s, where we did quite a bit of regrading to make the site universally accessible, there was archaeology that was done where we found remnants of that Revolutionary War era fort. So this will be to mark the corners of that fort.
Great. And one piece of this has been finishing the cultural landscape report for the site, which tells us the history really from the time Julia was talking about through the 19th and 20th centuries.
Absolutely. It's a document that we use in the National Park Service when we have cultural landscapes, and we develop the cultural landscape report, which is a history of the site that helps us determine the significance of the site, and it helps us to determine what type of treatment that we will, what will preserve those significant features of the site. as we develop it, and things like accessibility and other things, so we're not destroying those character defining features, as we call them. And so a shout out to Cynthia Zaitsevsky, a historian who did the original research. We did the original cultural landscape report back in the mid-90s, but it was never finalized. So for the work that we're doing now, we, with Kyle Zick, Landscape Architecture, updated it. Daniel Desolette did excellent work in taking Cynthia's work and updating that and creating quite a comprehensive history and treatment report for the site.
Yeah. Now, Julia, you and I have talked about Dorchester Heights many times over the years, and much of what I know about the site I've actually learned from you. What are some of your favorite stories about Dorchester Heights, about the monument, about Evacuation Day?
Oh my goodness. Well, about several years ago, and I believe it was 2007, I was involved in a project called First Bloom, and we worked with a local organization, Medicine Wheel Productions, to go to a local elementary school, the Condon School, and teach the kids about natural plants. And we ended up planting a garden at Dorchester Heights in the area called No Man's Land. It's a strip of land which was effectively used as a buffer between the monument grounds and the high school. And we planted, traditional native plants there. And also I put in some Roxbury russet apple trees, because the apple story of Dorchester Heights is probably my favorite. If you look in the history of the siege of Boston, you will find from the letters of Jonathan Baldwin, who was one of the engineers, about having to fell apple trees up at Leechmere Point to strengthen the siege line. And then when it was time to fortify the heights, and as they were gathering material in late February with Rufus Putnam, another engineer, they cut down the entire orchard belonging to Dr. Joseph Warren, about 150 trees. And perhaps it's fanciful of me to envision that they were Roxbury russet apple trees. An apple that is ugly because it's rusty on it, but an apple which is very dense in sugars, and it was used for cider. And I'm not talking about that cider that you get squeezed right from the apples. I'm talking about hard cider, barrels and barrels of it, which was one of the mainstays of the people in colonial Boston. And they cut down those trees to make chandeliers, which were basically like little boxes that would hold stacked logs that could be placed side by side on the hillside to effectively, from a distance, show a fortified position. So these trees, which we believe could grow, we know they can grow 40 or 50 feet high, may also have been the demise of Joseph Warren's father, who died from falling out of an apple tree. So as a symbol of all of that, we planted those at No Man's Land. And that's probably my favorite story of Dorchester Heights. And
wow.
It's just a great place. Being there, talking to the people who come up there, listening to their stories. Particularly how they've been up there since they were kids, and what this means to me and to them. And we were able to capture some of that in a video that we recently released. An 8-minute video on Dorchester Heights and Evacuation Day, and that can be found on our website. And we actually have a whole platform of just Dorchester Heights.
Yes, no, it's a great video, and the really striking thing to me was seeing all of these kids from South Boston who could tell the story of Evacuation Day and knew about Henry Knox and knew about General Thomas and knew about the Roxbury russet trees, and that's great detail. And the Roxbury russet apple, if I understand correctly, also continues sweetening after it's picked. So it's unusual in that sense, and made it a good apple for long-term storage as well as for cider. And so I'm happy to hear that you planted some more. And have they borne fruit yet?
Not yet. We actually are going to have to, do a little arborists, have some arborists come in and look at them because, they seem to have gotten it's got a little rust on them in the last couple of years. So, they need some work, and one of the things that we've been able to do, and we're actually working on a written contract with Medicine Wheel to work with their youth organization and our youth organizations to help take care of no man's land and to consult. We did soil test a couple of years ago. The soil only needs a little lime. Otherwise, it's wonderful soil. So, we're moving forward in so many areas, working with the local community, and I hope to just continually expand that over the next few years because it's so much potential.
I guess it's one of the challenges, is one of the real opportunities you have, having a park in the middle of the city, that you do work with a lot of different neighbors and community organizations. I wonder, Ruth, if you can tell us a little bit about your work as a landscape architect doing this when you're in the midst of really busy neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, when we did the work back in the mid-90s, that really was sort of the beginnings of the Dorchester Heights Association. It came out some of those meetings that we had because we worked very closely with the community, in understanding what the needs are of the community, and then, balancing that with the historic site. And, it's interesting because as you read through the cultural landscape report and the whole genesis of Thomas Park, which was the park that we have now that was built upon the fortifications, really came from as Boston was expanding and a lot of the Irish immigrants who settled in South Boston. So you have this neighborhood that's rapidly urbanizing, and there's a memorial that's written to the cities demanding open space and fresh water in this sort of rapidly urbanizing area. And that really is what led to the formation of Thomas Park. People would use the fortifications, what remained. They had great views of the city and people would walk there, but there was this demand that there was open space and fresh water. And what's not there now is the reservoir that was built where the high school is now. That was built even before the park was the reservoir to bring fresh water to the residents of South Boston.
Yes. And in fact, there was a fear when the reservoir went down and the high school was being built that people would lose the sense of history. It's one of the reasons for the monument was to commemorate this event of 1776. Absolutely.
In fact, it also, part of the history too is that even in 1814, when the second set of fortifications was built on the original May fortifications, the Star Fort, was kind of reinforced during the War of 1812. And there was regret even then that there was loss of the original Revolutionary era fortifications, and that the 1814 fortifications were much inferior in their design and their construction.
So is the Star Fort the 1814, or did it echo at all the Revolutionary site? Do you have any sense of what?
And Julia, you can chime in here too, but it was, because the original fortifications that, for which the site is really significant, the March fortifications, and as Julia had talked about these chandeliers, it was all because the ground was solid, frozen like 2 feet down. So it had to be all built sort of on top of the surface. But then in May, just in order to reinforce, in case the British were to return, and just, they reinforced the fortifications, and that's when the Star Fortification was built. And then it was rebuilt and sort of, it was in 1812, or 1814 for the war, during the War of 1812. But it was the original, the May fortifications, that was that original Star Fortification.
Wow. Julia, no, go on, Julia.
No, I was just going to say that when Washington left to head south toward New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, April 4th, Henry Knox did an inventory of the guns that were up there, and he cited 30 pieces Now, most of those were small mortars and, small cannon 3 and 4 pounders. I know I consider those small, they are compared to others, but there were 30 pieces up there at that time. I do not know what happened to all of them, but I do know that many pieces that were in the siege ended up back at Fort Ticonderoga as part of the army that did not go with Washington, headed west to reinforce the invasion of Canada. And of course, that flopped, and they ended up back at Fort Ticonderoga, which would play a pivotal role later in the war.
Mm. Yeah, I remember about 15 years ago, we brought one of those guns back from Fort Ticonderoga to Dorchester Heights. It was the little cannon that could, he called it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Julie, I remember, too, you did some research on General Thomas, and apparently his son left home in Kingston. His son was about 10 years old, came to join his dad at Dorchester Heights. You have some letters between General Thomas and Mrs. Thomas about the boy.
Right. General Thomas, at the time he was a colonel, I believe, wrote his wife. They had 12 children, by the way, and his letter starts out of Dear Mrs. Thomas. So I thought that was interesting. He wrote it on the 9th of March, which was 4 days after, they had unveiled their fortifications to the town of Boston, which apparently was in shock to see him. And he wrote about the nor'easter, which blew back the boats on the 7th when the British came from Fortress William, or the island, the castle, as they called the fort on Castle Island, and they were pushed back. And he's telling her all of this. He says, "Oh, by the way, your son John is fine. He escaped from Oakley, who we believe was a servant. I'm not 100% if he was an enslaved person or not, but he was a servant who apparently was in charge of taking care of the boy. He made his way through the lines, I don't know how many miles, to join his father, and said, he's here with me, he's safe, don't worry."
Wow.
So,
wow. So you've told us that we know Henry Knox went there to inventory the guns. And of course, Gilbert Stuart's great painting is of Washington at Dorchester Heights. And in the BPL, there's Emanuel Lutz's painting of Washington at Dorchester Heights. Do we know if Washington ever was at the Heights?
probably, but we can't say for 100%. There's diaries, letters alluding that he was going there, but we can't say 100%. I don't want to go there, because I don't have a letter that says I was with Washington and we were at the Heights on this day and this time. So, probably.
Well, that's a good answer. That's a fair enough answer. And on March 17th, when they're there, I can speak more authoritatively and say, yes, we know he was here, but I take it that we don't have the definitive, that smoking gun that puts him there.
Right. And the Park Service doesn't like to give a definitive answer when it's really is just speculation, no matter how big the evidence.
That's good. That's good. So do we have a sense? I know we can't say when work is going to be done, but I understand there is hope to have much of this done in time for the 250th.
That's certainly certainly the plan to do that. And well, even though, obviously for some time people have not been able to go up into the monument because it's just really unsafe. We had a water problem there, as Ruth can expound on, pretty much since the monument was built. And it's only it's been exacerbated over the years. But what we have been able to do just recently is we have placed 4 cameras at the top of the monument facing in the cardinal directions. And they are in real time taking, constant photographs 24/7. And you can see Spectacle Island. You can see the Blue Hills. You can, see the the church is on top of Mission Hill. You look down into Bat Bay. And again, they are on our website. They are on the same platform as we have our Dorchester Heights page, and they complement the same cameras that are at Bunker Hill. So one of the coolest things to do is on a clear night, take a look, log on and take a look at those cameras at Bunker Hill and at Dorchester Heights, and just see the lights. There are actually more lights from Bunker Hill, but, it's in a little more close that because Dorchester Heights looks out at the water. But, it's just amazing. And you can really see why this high ground was so, so important.
Yes. Thanks. So our guests are Julia Mize and Ruth Raphael from the Boston National Historical Park, and we're talking about Dorchester Heights. And can you tell us a little bit about the design of the monument itself, for those who might not have seen it recently?
Sure, and it was originally a competition, and it was the Peabody and Stearns architects, a prominent architectural firm at the time, also designed the Custom House in downtown Boston, and that was the winning design. And that it's a brick structure with marble cladding, and in the Georgian Revival style. And as Julia had indicated, there's reports as early as, so it was built in 1901, 1902, and as early as 1910, there are reports in sort of the public works and in, the city documentation that it was in terrible repair. And I think what happens, so many of these monuments are built, and it's built as a structure, but it's not being lived in, it's not being heated and ventilated. And so you just have, it's continually been plagued with issues of moisture getting inside the monument, and then you have freeze-thaw cycles that just kind of wreak havoc on the structure, and this just sort of continuing moisture in the monument just causes condensation. And so it's just been continual problem from almost they called Peabody and Stearns back in to look at it in 1910 and say, we think this thing is going to fall down. And they're like, no, it's structurally sound, but, it had to be repointed even as early as within 10 years of it being built.
Wow. Wow. Now, it wasn't built by the Park Service. Can you tell us who was responsible for the construction?
I believe it was the city that was at the time. But it actually became a national historic site in 1951, but it remained in city ownership until 1978, when it actually then became property of the National Park Service. At that point, in the site and the monument, both in fairly bad repair when we actually took it over in 1978. Yes.
Now, is there a plan to give the public access to the monument again once the work is done? Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I mean, the idea, yes, is to, we won't have it open on a regular basis, we'll be open daily, but we will. The idea is to restore the inside of the monument. Once we can get control, some of the work that'll be done on the monument is reinforcing the structure, repointing, re-roofing, everything to keep the moisture out, and then ventilation as well. Put some natural and some that will be enhanced in order to keep the air moving through the monument and to get rid of the moisture. So once all that is done and we can restore the interior stairway, the idea is to be able to get people back up into the monument, on special occasions and on, certain times. Yeah.
Great. Because it is, as Julia says, it is tremendous views from the top of it. I'm really glad you put the cameras up so that we can get a sense of that, how much you can see from the top of it.
Right, because on the site itself, you really lose, because of so much landfill and, and urbanization, and you just lose that sense of why it was so important strategically at the time.
Yeah, but you have in the last decade put up some really good waysides telling the story both of Evacuation Day, the Siege of Boston, as well as the site with the archaeological work that was done there in the 90s. And you have a photograph of one of the first an evacuation day ceremony in the 1930s. And so you've done some really good work with interpretation of it, but it's still, I think we'd all agree it does need more care, both from the Park Service as well as from the neighbors.
Well, it's, you know, that's the thing. The thing is, you've got to realize that, you know, even though this is a national monument, it is a park within a neighborhood, and because it is kind of off the beaten path, the primary caretakers of this is going to be the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And, you know, while it's obvious when we're doing our video and talking to so many people that the neighbors love this monument, you know, they love the history, they love being up there. You know, there's still a few things that need to be tightened up on, and I don't know, you know, the best way to do this. I'm still trying to find a good way. It has become, frankly, a dog park, mm-hmm. and people bring their dogs up there. There's all this great grass to roll on, and when they let them off leash, which unfortunately is much of the time, the dogs can be very destructive, digging holes, urinating on monuments, you know, including the Veterans Monument, which mm-hmm. we had to put a fence around to protect it. And that is probably the single most regular destructive forces that are happening at the monument. And the neighbor, you know, and it's really up to the neighborhood, because even with our cameras, we can't be there 24/7 to, mm-hmm. you know, and we love dogs, don't get me wrong, but, you know, they can be destructive because they're dogs. And
yes, yeah. So, can you tell us, and again, the neighborhood the South Boston Citizens Association really has been mm-hmm. overseeing the evacuation day ceremonies for over mm-hmm. 100 years. And so it really is a special place for the community. Yes. And we also like to say that in Charlestown, they built monuments to defeat, but in South Boston, we build them to victory, which of course, Dorchester Heights was a victory. And you know, so that as the of course, the neighborhood has changed many times since 1901 when mm-hmm. the monument was put up. And that's, again, part of the continuing story. I know, Ruth, you've been an urban fellow for the Park Service, and so this is an important urban site. And how does it fit in with other urban sites in the city?
Well, and I think, you know, the video that Julia did, you know, I think is part of what, you know, with the urban agenda and with what we were doing, is really to look at how do you continue to make these sites relevant within that urban context? Because, you know, now it becomes a place where, you know, it's a park, people go there, but how do you, you know, keep that history? And, you know, and I think, as you had mentioned, it was really great to see, you know, a lot of these kids who do know the history. And that's the idea. How do you continue to keep that relevant and make this place that it's relevant to younger generations, and that people continue to care about this, you know, historic site? So that's really part of what the urban agenda is all about. And, you know, as part of it is just interpreting it in, you know, in ways that are where you use public art, you use other things that mm-hmm. Reach different people in different ways to understand that history.
Yeah. We really are fortunate to have this great historical site right in the middle of the community. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, Ruth, what's been your favorite piece of Dorchester Heights in the years you've come to know about the site?
Oh, I really have come to love the site. I actually, you know, what I thought was kind of interesting when to connect into Julia's favorite part about the apples. You know, it's interesting because, and it's no longer there, but it was interesting with this whole petition. And I think relevant today, when we look at what's going on in the world today, and we look at how important open space is to our health and our well-being. And that's really what created Thomas Park. You know, it was the remains of the fortifications, which I think there was some desire to preserve even back then, you know, and then people would go there, and eventually became this public park. And then the fresh water, the reservoir was put in, And part of it was this desire to, it was part of the sanitation movement at the time of reform. And I think fresh water was expected to cure all ills. And I think it was also to help keep people off the hard cider. They thought, well, if they have fresh water, they won't be going to the garage shops and going. So that was all, I thought, very interesting. You can see that what's the no man's land now, which is that slope, is the embankment of that reservoir that's there. But I just think it's, that continuing importance of open space, within the city, and how it's always, it's been considered critical to the health of residents is to have that open space.
Great. Thank you. So our guests have been Julia Mize and Ruth Raphael from the Boston National Historical Park. Thank you both for taking time to talk with us today about Dorchester Heights, and we look forward to the hard work that is about to begin, or soon to begin, to restore the landscape, the hardscape, and the monument itself, and look forward to seeing you both on Evacuation Day in a coming year. Congratulations on the terrific video that Julia oversaw to tell the story of Evacuation Day. And thank you to Jonathan Lane, our producer, and to Doug Quigley and Dave and Peter Emmerich, who will pipe us out with The Road to Boston. So thank you all for joining us.